Hi everyone, Marcus in here. I'm here to talk about the preview cards for Dominion Menagerie that's coming out March 18th, 2020. This week, Donald X. Vaccarino, the creator of Dominion, released some previews. So we get a taste of what cards are going to be in the set, what mechanics are going to be in the set, what kind of things you're going to be able to do. And this week, all the preview cards, one each day, have been available on Dominion Online to play with in a special queue. So either against bots or against people. And it was a lot of fun, I must say. I always have fun with the previews, getting to play them a bit early online. And this video is just to collect my thoughts on all of them overall. Just a brief look into what I think of each card that's been previewed. On the whole, I think a lot of them are very powerful. They speed up the game. Most of them are just really good things. So let's get started. The first one we have is these two cards. The one on the left is Snowy Village. So +1 card, +4 actions, +1 buy. Ignore any further plus actions you get this turn. Um, I really like this card. It's not good as an only village, but basically, if you know that you can get through most of your deck, usually, and you have a specific set of terminals that's actions that don't give +1 action. Obviously, you could do Snowy Village helps you there, so you get to play, let's say, 4 such terminals instead of 1. But uh, in early game, I think it's actually very useful too. Like if you have a bunch of draw cards, let's say smithies and stuff, and it's the early game, and sometimes you want to play 2 cards at once to really, let's say, get enough money to buy 2 things instead of 1. Well, the Snowy Village at 3, it's very convenient. You get to do a lot of these things you normally wouldn't be able to do early, and it provides the buy. So um, paired with any draw card, it really helps early game, and then maybe in the middle game you have to stop playing them, or you have to maybe trash them if you have excess for some benefit, maybe like a remodel. But then in the late game, they're still useful. It's just when you play this, you can't anything that's +1 card, +1 action stops giving you +1 action. So you're really, if your deck is full of things that draw 1 in a chain like markets and stuff, and then you're stuck drawing these, it's gonna really kill you. It's gonna kill your turns early. So watch out. But I think you shouldn't be as scared of this card as it looks. For the ignore any further plus actions this turn. So the next one is Sheepdog. It's +2 cards, costs 3, but whenever you gain a card, you may play this from your hand. This reminds me a lot of Conspirator from Intrigue, where you do this thing and then you really go off and you have an amazing turn. But then if you get too many of them, you don't go off, and you have a dead turn. I feel like that happens with Sheepdog a lot unless you're very careful, unless, let's say, you have something that makes you gain a card every turn. Or you have a way to make sure that you can gain a card at the beginning of your turn. Maybe you top deck an Ironworks or something, or you're playing a duration. There are cards we'll talk about later here that kind of mitigate that, but in general, Sheepdog, it's very nice if you gain it to hand and you could play it at the same time. So let's say you use a Sculptor to put Sheepdog in hand, you get to play it. But there's not too many cards like that. Um, Otherwise, it's +2 cards, which is not great without an action. But if actions are a non-issue, then it's like a lab for 3. It's actually not. It's not a Labrador, but you know what I mean. Laboratory. Uh, I'm not super hyped on it, but maybe I think I underrate the Sheepdog. I'm maybe too cautious on it, but we'll see how it turns out in the future. The next one is Animal Fair, +4, +1 buy per empty supply pile, and instead of paying this card's cost, you may trash an action card from your hand. That thing on the bottom where you get to trash a card to get this, I find is very convenient. A lot of times you just have this early game chaff. I don't know, like some cantrip you have to buy on 2/5 like Vagrant or something, and then you could just get this for like a big burst of money conveniently, and Very useful. And then it costs 7 normally, so if you want to upgrade it or something, you could go to province. So if you have to get something exactly 1 more, or up to 1 more, Animal Fair has that nice property of uh, pole vaulting to province. I wish it always gave plus buy, but it doesn't. It's plus buy per empty supply pile, and early game you're not going to get that plus buy, so it's actually not. It's kind of deceptive like that. You think it might give you plus buy and everything you need, but no, it doesn't. It's the plus buy is like maybe I'm gonna get it if uh, there's something nuts going on, or if the game was gonna end anyway. But it's a nice card. Kiln is the next one. It's uh, +2 money, and then the next time you play a card this turn, you may first gain a copy of it. That includes any treasures you play after Kiln. So if you have like a Kiln and a gold, you play the Kiln in the action phase, you play the gold in the buy phase, you can get a gold. Uh, Kiln, it becomes way better if you have like villages, so that you can play Kiln and then you can play an action card. Without that, it's very it's a lot more limited in what it can do, and in general, it's awkward because normally when you have your village smithy stack, you want to play your village, then you want to play your draw or whatever, and then at the very end you play all the cards that don't draw. But the Kiln, if you want to get its effect to gain, let's say, a village or a smithy, you have to play it in the middle of the turn, and you don't know if you're going to have enough actions to keep following up your turn. So it could be pretty messy, but when it goes off, when it works out, it's very nice. But it's limited because you could always if you play multiple Kilns, the previous Kiln is not going to trigger on the current Kiln, so you can't play 5 Kilns and then play 1 market or something and gain 5 markets. It doesn't work like that. So I feel like it's compared to something like Haggler, where if you have like 3 Hagglers in play and then you buy something like a gold and then you get 3 markets, a Haggler's like a lot better for getting the same card multiple times, whereas this one is just not so less restrictive in some ways, but in other ways it's like you don't have to be able to buy something very high cost, but it's still a very nice card. I still like to say it's worse than Haggler is not a crazy thing, and in some cases it's better than Haggler, but +2 money is okay though. The next one is Barge, one of my favorites actually. Either now or at the start of your next turn, +3 cards and +1 buy, and that's just, it's a really good effect. I mean, just +3 cards +1 buy is a very useful effect, and for this to be able to either, there's 2 cases where you'd want to put it into next turn. Well, 2 big cases where you'd want to draw next turn is, one is you've already drawn everything in your deck and you want to have insurance for next turn, or 2, you don't want to reshuffle your deck. So let's say you have you're at the bottom, and if you play this for +3 cards, you might either draw dead actions you can't play, or you're going to shuffle and then everything is it's not going to be a good turn. You just play this and you wait around, and then the next turn you get like a really big turn because you didn't have to spend an action. So basically you're able to save the action you would have played on a previous turn to another turn where you might not have those actions anymore. So yeah, like stacking up on these is just like really, really something. If you have a lot of villages and then you play this, and then as long as you get that chain going once, then at the start of your next turn you're gonna have 8 cards in hand, so it's gonna be a lot easier to find the village before the draw. So it becomes hard to have a bad turn. It's just, it's really nice, and even in the early game, because it gives that +1 buy, you can maybe get some big turns with that. On day 2, Donald explained how horses work. So if you don't know, this is a horse. A horse is +2 cards, +1 action. Return this to his pile, but it's not on the supply. There's 30 horses, so there are cards that give you horses. So they're a temporary laboratory. They're exactly like Experiment from Renaissance, except you can't buy these directly. You get them from cards like these. So one of them is Supplies, which is a treasure card that costs 2 and it gives 1 money, and then when you play this, gain a horse onto your deck. So like all on the whole, that's like you got plus one card, plus an action, plus coin. If you think you added this one card, but then you get two cards later on. But it's a bit better than that, I think, because the horses, they start at the beginning of your next turn, so you know that you draw them at the point where it's hardest to line cards up. And the horses are separate actions, so there's some synergies with the treasures and there's synergies with actions. So having them separate, you can also keep trashing the horses for some kind of benefit while you still keep the supplies. So um, it's a cute card. I think if you get a few, it'll do nice things for you. Scrap um, is the next one. It's trash a card from your hand, choose a different thing per one it costs. Plus one card, plus one action, plus one buy, or plus one coin, and then, or you can gain a silver, or you can gain a horse, per cost. So that's one. Those are 6 choices. I thought you can pick the same choice multiple times, but no, you have to pick a different thing. So you can't get to plus 2 or plus 3 cards or something. You have to do plus 1 card and then choose one of the other 5. And if you trash something that's 6 or more, you get everything and you don't get any extras. I like this card a lot more than I thought I would because it's just really good at trashing estates. So let's say I draw this I open with this on my first 2 turns, and then I pair it up with an estate, and then I could trash the estate for a coin and a horse, or a coin and a silver. So it's as if I got a silver, a delayed silver, a lot of the time. And I get to get rid of an estate. So kind of that effect of getting rid of an estate and getting a silver instead is very good early, and then later on in the game, you can do some cute things with this. You can trash these things that have good on-buy effects on game, but then they're kind of not very useful in your deck. So stuff like Cemetery from Nocturne, or Mint from Prosperity, or just on the last turn of the game, you have all these duration cards that do something next turn, but there's no next turn anymore, so you just trash them to scrap. So it's very good late. I think it's good late game. I think it's good early game. In the middle game, it's kind of crummy because you're let's say you're trashing a silver, and then you get I don't know, plus 1 card, plus 1 action, plus silver. So you're kind of you can end up spinning a lot, as in you end up doing something that's not as productive as it looks, but and it's bad at trashing coppers, but still, it's still doing some early work for you. I think it's a nice versatile card. The next one is Livery or Livery. I don't know. Livery just makes it seem like it's a food. But anyway, that's plus 3 coins. It costs 5. Plus 3 coins. And this turn, when you gain a card costing 4 or more, you gain a horse. And it's gain, not buy. So first of all, it stacks if you have multiple liveries. You get multiple horses and a lot of money. And then if you gain something in the middle of the turn, you also get horses. I think the thing of gaining in the middle of the turn, because they cost 4, it's a bit harder to get that to work. But when you're buying stuff, oh man, this card is I find it's really good. Early game, it's plus 3, so it's not bad. And then you get a horse, but the horse is kind of in small numbers. The horses aren't too impactful, and that kind of hurts supplies a little bit too, because it's kind of like a cute thing to get them early. But then if they still help you draw and stuff and get to play more liveries, and then as the game goes on, and then towards later on in the game, when you're able to play these, and if you're able to play these in multiples, it gets kind of crazy. Or even if you just play one and then you're able to get multiple cards, I don't know, with like Port or Ball, anything that gives you multiple cards, it starts to ramp up pretty fast. It's quite an impressive card in the right circumstances, and it always gives at least plus 3, so it's good for buying province. And then you buy province and you get a horse, so it's as if it's a plus 1 card, plus 1 action, plus 3 coins, versus supplies where it's plus 1. But it costs. It's actually not plus 1 card, plus 1 action, because it costs you an action to play. But anyway, I showed the horse already. The day 3 we showed the cards at Exile, and this is the Exile mat, so it's a very nice expedition. It's kind of like Expedition that very nice orange art. So this is a mat, so there are cards that put cards on your exile mat, and when you gain a card, you may discard all other copies of it from here. So let's say you have a copper on your exile mats, and then you gain a copper, you can decide to discard all your coppers on this, but then that other copper is still gained. It's a May ability, so I didn't catch that, so I thought you had to discard, but no, it's a May. So we'll see the cards that interact with this. So you can't put cards in your exile mat by choice. You have to have a card that does it for you. So the cards that do it for you are, well, we saw 3 of them on day 3 of the previews. So the one on the left is Bounty Hunter, costs 4, +1 action. Exile a card from your hand. If you didn't have a copy of it in exile, +3 coins. So that's, you exile a card, and if it's the first time you exile that card, if there's no other copy of that card in the exile, you get +3. And you always get the plus action. So the thing with exile, it's not in your deck anymore, so it's always making your deck smaller, which is usually good. It's good as long as you're able to do the things. It helps you do the things you want to do more often. Whatever, I don't want to get into that too much, but yeah, this card is very nice, I think. It costs 4, so it's kind of, sometimes it's tricky to get it in the very beginning of the game, but usually you want to get it in the very beginning of the game, because you exile a copper the first time, you get +3. You exile an estate the first time, you get +3. So you're going to be able to afford a lot of expensive cards the turn where you play this, in the first few turns where you play this. So you get very good economy. And then as the game goes on and you have some, let's say, middling cards, you're able to exile them too for that +3 if you need to. So it's kind of like scrap. It's kind of there for you when you really want it, and especially like in the last turn, you could just get rid of all these duration cards that were not useful anymore. So it's, and in the meantime, it's always making your deck smaller without costing an action. So even though it falls off in terms of economy in the middle of the game, but because it gives you so much in the very beginning of the game, it's just ends up being quite good. The only case is, the thing is, it doesn't stack super well with itself, so you can thin very fast, but you're not going to keep getting economy. Like, you need to buy other cards to get economy, and then it's only one shot. You have to be careful with that. So 1 or 2 is fine, but compared to, let's say, Forger, like, it also gives you +buy every time you use it, and it always gives you coin. But early, it gives you more money than Forger ever will. But middle of the game, it's just thinning your deck. Stockpile is the next one. It's a treasure that costs 3. It gives you 3 money, so just as much as gold, and it gives you +1 buy. And when you play this, exile it. So you play it once, and then it's gone. It's in your exile mat here, so you can't access it until you buy gain another stockpile. So the first time you have 1 stockpile, then you gain another stockpile, then you'll have 2 in the deck, and then you'll get another stockpile. You have 3 in the deck. So over time, you get more and more stockpiles. Even though they're all temporary, every time you get a new one, it's like you get even more economy. So they kind of have that nice ramp-up effect. They run out, especially if your opponent is going after them, but it ends up being it ends up being very scary if you're playing, let's say, you're kind of aiming for money. And if you're able to do a lot with just buying stockpiles very often, and then buying expensive cards, and then towards the end of your deck's shuffle, you just buy another stockpile, and then you get all the stockpiles back. So it's able to, by the time you can't play stockpiles anymore, either your deck is in a really good spot, or you have so many provinces that you'll be fine. You'll maybe get a lucky turn. So basically, there's multiple uses of it. In the opening, I'm not sure what to think about it when you get at the very beginning of the game, because it's good at hitting, let's say, a 6-cost card, but then you lose the stockpile until you buy a new one. So you're kind of stuck. It's kind of like, if you want to get them back, it's kind of like Capital, where you get 6 money and then you have to pay off the 6 money. Well, in this case, you're not paying off the 6 money. You're just you're having less economy in your deck in the long term. But having only a copper instead of a silver, it's not it could be kind of bad in the early game actually. So it's you have to weigh that. But otherwise, if you want to have a very small deck, but you want to have like a really expensive card, and then the rest is going to be very few cards except the expensive cards, well, the stockpile is going to be very nice. And then later on in the game, you could get more stock. You could get another stockpile, and those early stockpiles they come back. So I'm still not sure how best to use this card, but it's quite interesting. And then the last one is Coven, a nice dancing witches there. So it costs 5 +1 action +2 money. Each other player exiles a curse from the supply. If they can't, they discard their exiled curses. So when they can't is when there's no more curses left. If they can't gain exile a curse, they never gain the curse. There's no way they ever gained it, so they can never react with Watchtower or Trader or anything like that. So it's basically, if let's say one person gets Coven and the other doesn't, each time the person plays Coven, the other person every other player loses 1 VP because of the curses, and then after the 11th time the Coven is played, all the curses enter in the deck at once. So it could be very hard to trash all those curses once they come at once. But if 2 people are playing Coven against each other and suddenly all 5 curses come into the deck, you could maybe trash them over time. But the thing is, it's like silver, right? It's +1 action +2 money, so it's kind of convenient in the early game. The only thing is opportunity cost, but it doesn't harm you as much. So it's actually quite easy to get Covens early and then just start the clock. Put pressure on the opponent to do something about what you're doing until the curses come. Plus, it's like action synergy, so if you have, let's say, draw to X, like, let's say, minion Coven, or you're just doing a lot of stuff where you like to have actions anyway, the Coven is a nice bonus over silver. But it's still nothing spectacular until the curses enter the deck, but still, it's because it's silver, and if the other person has 10 points, you need to go win the provinces 5-3, and how could you be sure you're going to win the provinces 5-3 when you're being hit by Coven all the time? That's in a typical game with no other sources of green cards. But if not that you're hit by Coven, but Coven is as a silver doesn't make it that hard to actually pressure the provinces. And then if there's things like those adventures tokens that say +1 card, so pathfinding on Coven, it gets pretty nuts. It can be centralizing, but I find that other cursors are just way more impactful. Let's say Witch or Montebank or Cultist. Anything that kind of gives the junk right away is just way more impactful than Coven. Coven is kind of like a side thing, but I don't find it that impressive in the presence of other cursors, but it's still good in its own way. So on day 4, we were introduced to a mechanic called ways. So every game you can have up to 1 way recommended, at least. You don't get 2 ways usually. You don't. It's recommended to have at most 1 way. So a way is just when you could play a card. When you play a card, you can instead do the effect of the way on all this, and this is true of all of your cards. So if I have a Smithy, I can instead do Way of the Ox, and I'll get +2 actions, or I could do +1 action, discard my hand for +3 like the mole over there, or I could just set it aside and play it at the start of my next turn with the turtle. The turtle still costs you an action, so it's kind of like you do the barge effect on any card with Way of the Turtle. So that's kind of nice on draw cards especially, but similar to barge. But there's other effects where, let's say you have a nice card that gives you +2 money, let's say Haggler, but you all your rest of your hand is junk, so you could kind of set it aside, and on a better turn, when you have more money, you can take advantage of things like that, or buy light livery or anything else. I like that flexibility of Way of the Turtle. Way of the Ox is, you still have to be careful because in just playing +2 actions is not that great early game anyway, but like I'll have let's say a case where you have 2 copies of Eternal. So let's say I open 2 Swindlers and then I draw the Swindlers together. But if I make 1 Swindler Way of the Ox, I did nothing because I just have the other Swindler. I wasn't gonna play it it's not like I'm gonna get any other benefit from the plus action. So basically, it's when you have multiple actions. So it's actually the way of the ox is much better when you have draw cards. So it's kind of when you could turn any smithy into a noble's choice, where it's either plus 2 actions or plus 3 draw. So that becomes a lot nicer. So with the way of the ox, and then the way of the mole. But with way of the ox, actually go back to that. It means all these like kind of middling cards that you get in the middle early game, it could still be used as extra actions later on. So that's kind of always nice. Like your trashes, for example, will be able to can be converted to actions. But way of the mole, that's very good if you just need to keep seeing one particular card over and over again. It's kind of like a mini minion. So instead of discard your hand plus 4 cards, it's plus 3 cards, but all those same synergies kind of still apply. So if you're playing, let's say, pawns or actually covens now, like plus 1 action plus money, and then the last one gets played for draw, that's good. If you need to see a lot of cards very often, so often it's travelers, so the things from adventures like peasant page, and you want to see them constantly, then the way of the mole becomes extremely good just to see it super fast. So it really speeds up those kinds of games. And then way of the turtle, kind of talked about it already, but just very nice in general for a lot of things, but still very limited in use when there's no villages. It's kind of saves you for having a bad turn, but it's not doing anything spectacular otherwise in cases where there's no villages, because it still costs an action. Then we also got some events on day 4. Toil, it's plus 2 money, so you replaces the buy you spend on it, and you get to play an action from your hand. So you get to convert money into villages, basically. And turns out to be pretty good on anything that's like while in play. So let's say you need to get goons or hagglers or liveries in play, and you have too many, but you just keep toiling away, and then they replace the money that you spent on toil. So then the next time you buy a card, you get these extra benefits. And sometimes those benefits end up really being really good. So it's just kind of makes what you're doing a lot more flexible. It kind of makes it very powerful to have actions that give money. So all of those become a lot better. Even stuff like cut purse. Even though if you keep spending the money on toil, it means that you cluttered your deck with stuff that generated 0 money. Even if it's doing an attack. I mean, if you look at Sea Hag, it does a powerful attack, but it gives no money, so it's kind of hurts you at the same time. But there are other cases where the toil is quite useful. The thing is, once you toil, you can't play any more treasures. So if you're playing a draw card, you're not going to be able to draw any more treasures. You're just going to be able to draw more cards that you can toil. Which, again, if it's like a adventures traveler, like a peasant or something, then you just kind of want to see that as often as possible. But in other cases, yeah. The other one is commerce. Gain a gold per differently named card you've gained this turn. Costs 5 as an event. This one I haven't gotten too much of a hand grip on it, but usually it's kind of useful in terms of, hey, I get a free gold. Not a free gold, but you get a 5 cost gold. The thing is, a lot of the time when you're in a turn and you're gaining stuff in the middle of the turn, you're getting like one specific card. So let's say I'm playing Ironworks, it tends to be getting more of a specific cantrip. There's usually not often that I'm getting multiple cards in my action phase. Usually you're getting like 1 or 2. So this is going to give you 1 gold if you have 1 buy. But if you buy other cards, like let's say, I don't know, you buy silver and then you buy the commerce, then you're going to get extra gold. So basically, if you have a lot of buys, it becomes a lot better. If you have buys and money, commerce is easier to take advantage of. Otherwise, it's kind of like killed, and it's kind of surprisingly inconvenient to get all these differently named cards to get a big burst of gold. But if you're wondering, and gold is kind of good when you have a otherwise very thin deck. Let's say you've trashed a lot of cards and you have a lot of actions with no economy. The commerce, that could be your plan. It's kind of like Windfall from Empires, where you have no deck and discard, and then you just buy the Windfall to get 3 gold. Sometimes that's a bit more convenient, but other times commerce is going to be like a superior version of that. but it's not strictly superior. Sometimes Windfall is just better because you have nothing that gains in the middle of the turn. You just have a Trasher. The last one, Populate, costs 10, gain 1 card from each action supply pile. You know, I thought, oh, there's so many treasures in the kingdom these days and night cards and all these other things that I don't really want. Is Populate going to be that good? It is really good. It turns out that if you have 10 and you were going to buy a province anyway, instead of buying a province once and then hoping you're going to get more provinces down the road, you buy a Populate and you give up 1 province, but then you're sure that like pretty much every turn after this one, you're going to be able to do better than even buying a province. You're going to be doing like maybe 2 provinces or at least 1 province for like the rest of the game. And if you populate twice, yeah, so it gets even more nuts. So basically, it scales very quickly. Most of the time, there are synergies in the kingdom a lot of the time, and Populate gives you basically a little bit of every possible synergy you can see from the kingdom cards. That's the big thing, is that a lot of the Populate just gives you every synergy present in the kingdom quite easily, and then some synergies you didn't even realize were there. And especially if there's something that gets rid of another card for benefit. So if there's like a 1 or 2 dud cards in there in the supply, you could trash them. Like you could scrap them or remodel them or something. So even those cards just becomes extra stuff. And if you have things that trigger on gain, so like livery is the big one where you gain like a bunch of horses after you populate. What other cards are effective on gain? I guess Triumph from Empires, but basically Populate is nuts. For 10 is like a real bargain. Sometimes you just happen to hit that early in the game. Let's say you draw a smithy and then you played another smithy through a way or some special effect, or you barged and you got like this perfect draw and you got all your money at the same time, and you buy Populate and it's like turn 6 or something somehow. Then you're probably like so far ahead of your opponent at that point. It's ridiculous, and it's maybe kind of 2 variants. I guess that 10 cost is trying to avoid those cases where one person hits and the other doesn't early game unless they really try, but I think sometimes it'll still happen where someone just is way luckier and hits that 10, and it's way crazier than any previous card that one player spikes and the other doesn't. Even King's Court, it's not the same. It's not even as this is crazier than that when one person hits it early. Anyway, the last few cards are stuff that was shown on day 5. We have 3. One of them is Mastermind. The other is Black Cat and Wayfarer. There's nothing special about. There's no new mechanics related to these cards necessarily. Actually, Wayfarer, yes, but this is kind of like some miscellaneous cards that were shown. So, like Mastermind, it's a 5-cost action duration, and at the start of your next turn, you may play an action card from your hand 3 times. So it's like duration King's Court, but at the same time, if you want to play it actually 3 times every turn, you need like twice as many Masterminds as King's Courts, but they cost 5. They cost 5, and the search space is a tiny bit bigger than King's Court, because in King's Court you have to have 4 of the cards at the beginning of the turn that you get to choose. With Mastermind, it's 5. And Mastermind, if you already drew a bunch of cards, so it's like you drew everything, you play a bunch of Masterminds, and next turn you're probably going to hopefully find something again that you can play 3 times. Even if it's a smithy, you'll still have 1 action left because it costs you only an action on the previous turn you played it. It's quite powerful. It's just kind of, you don't want to rely on it too early, because what if you play the Mastermind and you had no action at the start of your turn? So you have to wait a little bit, you have to trash a little bit, you have to bide your time, really play it like a Mastermind. And then at the perfect moment you start getting these Masterminds and you start going nuts. It can snowball very fast, I think. Black Cat is kind of a weird one. It's plus 2 cards, and if it isn't your turn, each other player gains a curse. And when that happens is when another player gains a victory card, you may play this from your hand. So if an opponent on their own turn, so not on yours, they buy or gain a victory card, however much, you can play Black Cats, and then you'll curse them. and every black cat that you play might draw more black cats that you could still react with and play. So it's actually turns out that if you buy a lot of black cats early in the game, then if an opponent is just buying gold, silver, and province, they're most probably going to lose. Like this, even though there's all this clutter that you can't play very often, the +2 cards, by the time the opponent actually tries to do anything to win the game, they end up losing the game. So it's actually it's a lot stronger than it looks. And as a 2-cost, I mean, you could use it early game as like a +2 draw card as a moat if you have enough actions. It's still not. Usually, there's something better to do with your actions, but it's still draw. And if somehow you're able to play keep a bunch of these in your deck, and still do some other impressive things, then your opponent is going to be a really bad spot, because then as soon as they start greening, you play these and then you start killing them with curses, and you get a huge starting hand next turn. So that's the other thing. It's Road Network from Renaissance and the Cursor at the same, and like a Swamp Hag from Adventures at the same time. It's kind of this, and your opponent doesn't know how many black cats you're gonna have, but if you have at least one, then they'll probably draw more. So it's kind of a pretty scary card. The last one is the Wayfarer, and it's +3 cards. You may gain a silver, and then this card has the same cost as the last other card gained this turn, if any. And that effect doesn't just apply to the cards you gain, but any card anyone gains. So if you, let's say, you play a Jester and you give the opponent a silver, well, the Wayfarer now costs 0 because copper costs 0. For that effect, I would have expected it would just be like, let's say, +3 cards, like a cute thing like it's the same theme as Animal Fair, where it has a much cheaper cost, an alternate cost, and it does something and does some small bonus. Except no, the silver gain is not a small bonus. The silver gain is exactly the kind of thing you want when you're playing cards that draw. So if you got your deck, let's say, pretty thin, and you have you want to draw your deck every turn, well, now you get to draw your deck every turn, and then you could always gain extra silver, so that makes sure that you're never drawing more than you actually have. So that means you always get this extra economy every turn, almost like Tragic Hero that just keeps giving you treasure, even if it's you have a way bigger hand size. But I mean, it's silver is not as good as gold, or it doesn't give +buy, but it's just this huge economy boost that you could get out of nowhere. And if there's some convenient way, let's say you get +2 buys, so let's say Traveling Fair on 2, you buy a copper and you buy a Wayfarer. I don't know if that's good, but there are cute things you could do where sometimes you gain a very cheap card, and then you could Wayfarer too. So even let's say you gain a Wisp or something. Let's say you pop Pixie and you gain some Wisps. I think that means your Wayfarer will also cost 0. And then for the rest of it's a bit trickier, because unlike something like Peddler, where you can count it out costing 8 for the rest of your action phase, this card's cost will keep changing even in the middle of your turn. So if you, let's say, remodel, if you gained, let's say, a silver, this is going to cost 3, so you can't remodel it into province anymore. On that token, though, if you remodel a Wayfarer into a province, or expand it into a platinum, or if you gain a platinum, then all your Wayfarers cost 9, and then you could remodel them to colony and stuff like that. So it could even become more expensive. Very strong. I think it's a very strong card overall. But anyway, that's my thoughts. I think a lot of these cards just do a lot to make the game a bit faster, to do more explosive, more snowball, and actually the Black Cat is just some other weirdness. I don't know, but it snowballs the second that the opponent tries to win the game with green cards. So anyway, thanks for listening. See you around.